The man who was once 2 steps away from being president has just stepped into federal court to answer to some very serious charges. Former Republican House Speaker Dennis Hastert is accused of evading banking rules and then lying to the FBI about it. The cash was allegedly used as hush money to conceal past misconduct from 30-plus years ago with someone identified in court docs as only Individual A. This is the first time that we have seen Hastert since the indictment came out last month. Law enforcement officials have confirmed to NBC News that the past misconduct was sexual in nature and involved a male student at the school where Hastert taught and worked as a wrestling coach. It's important to note here that Hastert has not been charged with sexual abuse or anything having to do with that actual alleged misconduct. The statute of limitations has passed on that. But some experts are saying that Hastert is eventually likely to make a deal here to keep the details of that past misconduct from being revealed in trial. Today, we're expecting a brief arraignment in Chicago's federal court, and the main thing we will learn is if Hastert pleads guilty or not. Soon after, U.S. Marshals are expected to process the former speaker, taking his fingerprints, a mugshot, and pretrial interviews. When that is done, Hastert is expected to be released on his own recognizance. But we have a ton to cover before any of that happens, so let's bring in MSNBC's Adam Reese. He's outside the courthouse. Adam, what can we expect?
Crystal, good afternoon. The hearing has begun. They've just been called to order. We expect this to be a very short hearing. They'll read the charges to Mr. Hastert. He'll enter a plea. We believe it's likely that it will be not guilty, and they'll set a date for another hearing. There'll be some discussion about discovery going forward, and then he'll likely be processed if he wasn't already processed before. He arrived about an hour early, so it's possible he had his fingerprints and mugshot taken early, and then he'll be released on his own recognizance. Now, he arrived, as I said, about an hour and 15 minutes early to a crush of media. He entered the courtroom and, he entered the building just like anybody else would. He went through the metal detector. He put his belongings through the X-ray machine. He was then wanded, and then he went upstairs. So this is all a normal process for an arraignment, but it's a very unusual situation considering who it is that's being arraigned.
Unusual indeed. Adam Reese, thank you for that report. And let's bring in NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams. And Pete, what can we expect next here?
Well, just a couple of notes. First of all, according to our folks in the courtroom, this hearing is moving very fast. The former speaker, his lawyer, has already entered not guilty pleas for him on both the counts. So that was to be expected. His lawyers, Dennis Hastert, apparently has some guns on his property. Sometimes in these hearings, if a person is charged with a felony, there's a restriction on firearms. The lawyer has asked that he be allowed a little more time to get these guns off his property, 2 extra weeks. The judge has apparently allowed that. Bond has been set at $4,500, which is what it was originally, so it'll probably be released on his own recognizance. These hearings are very short. The judge may or may not set a detention hearing. It doesn't sound like he's going to do that if he's already set the bond. So the next thing would be for the judge to set a trial date. And then there'll be all the pretrial motions and all the things that normally go on before a trial. So that at the end of today, the judge may set a trial date or at least set a scheduling hearing date at which a trial date would be set.
And Pete, when you look at a trial like this, given what we know at this time, would you expect his defense lawyers to be focused exclusively on beating these 2 federal charges, or also on trying to craft a strategy that avoids disclosing or even getting into some of the underlying other allegations, which of course are not what he's being charged with, but according to what we do know, seem like they might bring great embarrassment to him?
I'm sure that that's a big factor for the defense. And of course, we can't rule out the possibility that his lawyer may try to negotiate a plea with the government so that there never is a trial here. As a practical matter, Ari, as you understand, no matter what happens from here on, stuff is going to come out that they don't want to come out. Even if there's a guilty plea, there will be court documents that will spell out what the government would have proven had it gone to trial. But of course, those charges are confined to the improper reporting of cash transactions and lying to the FBI, but that still leaves a fair amount of discretion for what the government would ultimately say. Just another quick note from our folks in the courtroom. Normally, the lawyer speaks for the client, enters the plea, but the judge has to satisfy himself that the defendant understands the plea, and according to our folks in the courtroom, Dennis Hastert was asked if he understands the charges, and he whispered yes. Hastert was asked if that is his signature on the indictment, that he must have nodded yes and not spoken to that.
Pete, there was some speculation today that the prosecution would show its hand a little bit and disclose more of the kind of information you were just talking about that we may hear later on. But was there any of that in the courtroom today, or?
No, apparently not. And frankly, I don't think that was very likely here. What you often have happen in these cases where nothing is known about a case until the defendant is indicted and they appear in court, the government will often cite additional evidence or say how serious the crime is in order to get a restriction on pretrial release, in order to seek a very high bail or to ask that the defendant be confined in jail until the trial. You know, this is not the case here, so it's not surprising that the prosecutors didn't apparently spell out much more about their case.
All right, Pete Williams, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
You bet.